This is a pack that comes from Ableton itself. It's done in collaboration with Sonovox, which I'll talk about a little bit. But this is basically a roundup of how this pack could be used. It's probably going to really be handy for people who are doing production music, so making like cues or trailers or instrumentals for production, like television, movies, commercial purposes like that, because these Woodwinds libraries, orchestral libraries, piano libraries, sort of more classically oriented libraries, tend to be designed around that sort of composer production audience. And one of the things to consider here is that there's a lot of technical layers that go into producing the kind of library that can actually create authentic horns, or in this case woodwinds or strings. I've covered some of the strings and brass packs in the past, and there's a lot of different layers of technology that have to go in. Multi-sampling, so sampling from different mics around the room, getting lots of different articulations, which are going to be unique to each woodwind instrument, for example, is going to have articulations that are unique to that instrument. And as a production music composer, you're going to want to have flexibility with those articulations. It's not just a matter of getting a sound that would fool the average person, like, oh yeah, that's obviously a clarinet, but being able to actually recreate the performance of a great clarinet player, where they're armed with all these articulations and all of these skills to bring nuance and expressiveness out of that instrument. Those are the kinds of layers that are built into professional sound libraries. And as a consequence of that being actually quite difficult, it's not just a matter of sampling the instrument and putting it into a sampler, but these incredibly complex layers of sampling and key switches that will, change the timbre and articulation of the instrument. But the effect of that is that these companies like Sonovox, who contributed to this one, they're already putting in all this work. They're going to just basically shift their attention largely to making libraries that are designed for production. Now, since this is coming out with Ableton, Ableton's not really the go-to DAW for that kind of production composition. People in that sphere would be more likely to use Cubase or Pro Tools or Logic, and a more traditional linear DAW kind of setup, not so much the performance or electronic music production environment that Ableton is so ideal for. But you are going to still see these libraries in here, and what would you use them for in like the traditional Ableton environment, where maybe you're working on electronic music, for example, is something I also want to address. So first question is this a legit sound pack for doing serious production music composition? The second question is, okay, even if it is, then what can I do with it in like a traditional EDM type environment, right? So that's what we're going to look at, and I'm going to just switch over to my computer here because I always like to see what Ableton is saying about their pack. So delivers a variety of clear and vibrant wind instruments, features solo and ensemble, flute, clarinet, bassoon, oboe, and English horn. So there's quite a lot of variety here in terms of the instrumentation. Often professional sound libraries will offer composers both a solo and ensemble option, because the soloist might be playing a melody or a motif, while the ensemble is needed to back them up harmonically, things like that. So solo and ensemble, and then the range of instruments looks pretty good. It's not I'm not overwhelmed with choices here, but this is enough to probably do some fairly substantial production. Let's listen to some of the samples. It's not coming through on my system here, so let me just troubleshoot that quickly. You know what maybe I'm going to need to do is bring up, so I'm over here, now I'm in Ableton. I'm going to see if we can just bring up the sessions here. So I'm going to go to Orchestral Woodwinds and show the default lesson. And that comes up over here. They don't have the project in here. So I'm not sure why this is not. It's playing back on my computer. You might be able to hear it a little bit in the background, but it's not coming through on Ableton, or sorry, through the live stream audio here. Should be coming through here, but it's not. At any rate, I can tell you from listening to it here that they're definitely creating some pretty compelling sounds with it. So I would encourage you, maybe look this up yourself. If you just Google Orchestral Woodwinds, you'll come to this page. Let's just continue on looking at some of the details here. 7 gigs, that is a pretty substantial library. Presets are probably really, you know, like maybe more articulations oriented. Let's see what they have to say. This is sort of applying this library, right? So as I mentioned earlier, this is in cooperation with Sonovox. Now Sonovox has made a bunch of great sound packs. So they're very experienced. This is not a fly-by-night company. They have done a lot of production sound libraries. And so it wouldn't be surprising that they would be able to produce something that was, you know, a substantial contender. It was recorded with the Boston Pops, which is kind of standard. Not that it would always be the Boston Pops, but that it would always be like a, you know, pretty legitimate symphony that they would go and record and take these samples from there. The environment, you know, is a carefully chosen hall. Let's see. So small enough to lend a sense of intimacy. Oh, they're describing the room here. All right, all instruments are multi-sampled, which is going to mean that you have a lot more velocity layers. You have more nuance, more expressiveness built into the instruments, which is important. Variety of velocities and articulations. So articulations are super important. Velocity is super important. Velocities usually offer you the control over dynamics, right? And then articulations offer you control over expression. So how it's expressed, like what articulations are, you know, for example, on a guitar, a hammer-on, a bend, a pull-off, that kind of thing. I'm not a woodwind player, so I'm not that familiar with the different articulations, but I am a guitar player. I know that an articulation is something kind of unique to the instrument. I mean, not always totally unique. There will be articulations that are possible on multiple instruments, you know, in multiple brass or multiple woodwind instruments. But when you have an instrument like this that uses a reed, there are going to be sounds and characteristics to your timbre you can create that are unique to reed instruments, or in the case of like a flute, you know, that's kind of a wind instrument, but there's going to be characteristic sounds you can get out of flute or an oboe that you can't get out of a, you know, I don't know, a trombone or a violin. And those articulations are very important. So we're going to be looking to see if those are in there. So perfectly integrated into the workflow, loaded via Simpler, which is included with Live. All instruments take advantage of Smart Priming Live's new resource-efficient sample engine. So that just means basically you can run this huge collection of 7 gigabytes of audio without, absolutely bringing your CPU to its knees. Includes special rack versions of each instrument with all articulations switchable via a single macro. So this is important because I've run into this many times with Ableton. Traditionally, if I'm working in other environments, it is common that you can switch articulations using what are called key switches. So that would be a key on your keyboard, usually really low, like, D sharp -2 or something. It would be a key really low on the keyboard that you're unlikely to play, that would be dedicated to switching that instrument from one articulation to another, and then whatever you play in the upper registers on the keyboard is now that articulation, and you can switch between those dynamically so that you can create a line in which, say, your oboe plays for 5 measures with one articulation and then 3 more measures with another articulation. Right, so all of that control over articulations is connected with this idea of key switching, but they don't do key switching in this traditional way with live. They use macros, and we'll actually see kind of how that works. So let's go back to Ableton here and take a look at some of these sounds. So here we are. Orchestral Woodwinds is the pack. And let's listen to some of these sounds. Okay, so that's an example of an articulation. You got this trill, vibrato, legato. Legato is just a long held note, and vibrato is that pulsing. This is solo legato, so no vibrato. Staccato is a very sort of tight sounding. So the alto flute solo and alto flute legato are similar, but you'll notice that the solo is a brighter sound. The legato in this case is a more mellow sound. And then we'll see that the other instruments kind of have that, although sax only has legato. Let's look up clarinet. So lots more in the way of articulations under clarinet. We've got legato, vibrato, legato, so a little brighter, but long notes, right? So this would be an ensemble. They're calling it a section. Half-step trills. And they've even got 2 different clarinets here. So the B-flat clarinet and E-flat clarinet. So depending on the one that you want, you'll be able to choose between those 2. But there is a staccato for both B-flat and E-flat, legato, and then the solo, which is going to be kind of more emotive, more expressive, right? Let's see, English horn, again a trill, vibrato, legato, staccato, right? So if we were to bring one of these, let's go ahead and grab I'm going to grab this oboe and I'm going to bring it over here into one of my tracks. And I can see down here that I've got some macros already set up. And let's just take a look and see what these sound like. So I am on my push here. So one of the nice things about using an ensemble rather than a solo and then playing chords is that oftentimes in these packs the sections are going to handle the sampling a bit more efficiently. If you create many tracks with solos and then you are running chords through them, you basically can find yourself sometimes, I'm not sure of the technical constraints of this particular package, but when you use the sections and ensembles, then ensemble is the more common term for this, then you're gonna be relying on the sound pack designers to have optimized the playback so that you get the rich sound of the ensemble, right? Like full and rich, but you also are saving yourself some of the CPU and hard drive strain. Now this they had mentioned here about this technology, smart priming, which I guess is unique to live. They're presenting it as though this is a feature of live that is oriented around saving your CPU as well. All right, so it does sound, as you can hopefully hear. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the accent on my push. So there are a lot of articulations here, and when I am looking at the instrument down here, I have some control over, the color, which would be like timbre and such. That's probably just standard filtering. They did mention that includes special rack versions of each instrument with all articulations switchable by a single macro. And I want to find those examples. So perhaps this is what they're talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my legato vibrato version and just look at, let me take this section out here, bring it back in. Okay, that was my mistake. So now what we see over here is, and I have to kind of zoom in differently, we have this articulation knob. So when we are playing a note, see, it's not coming out here. I was not in the right range, which is an important lesson to learn as well. So like when I hit this note, no note comes out, and that is because the oboe doesn't play that note. It can't play that low. So this is another thing to be aware of when you're using orchestral libraries, is that instruments have very specific ranges, and those ranges are usually, the more professional the pack, the more likely it is. In fact, I've never encountered a pack that'll allow you to play out of the instrument's range. That's on purpose. So if you're playing a note and you're not hearing anything, go up an octave. A little 2001. So the range goes up there, right? But anyway, as I play this note, if I come down here to the articulations, let's just change the articulation. So I'm getting a different articulation depending on the value. And the two here are vibrato and legato. So that's going through. You can actually see right here, as I change it, you'll see the signal coming through legato. Let me switch back to the screen here. So I've got this articulation control here, and when it's turned all the way down, you're going to see the MIDI comes through legato vibrato. Whereas when I turn the articulation up, you're going to see it come through this other device chain for legato. So that's an example of how they are allowing you to control articulations via a macro. And it sounds like they have a specific rack, but you can also just play rack. You can load up racks for very specific articulations as well. So, my initial response to this is that it sounds really good. I know Sonovox from other personal experience, and they make great sounds. These sound really good. Now, to really compose something that is going to sound authentic, woodwinds, you're going to want to record the MIDI. You play out your parts, you put your harmony down. You want to go back and revise what kinds of articulations are being used in different places to create expression, right? Then the final thing you want to do, and this is not really a live stream about composing, so I'm not really going to get into this too much, but for anybody who's interested in some quick tips, once you've recorded the melody and the harmony, and once you've got your general instruments, or you're using oboe, flute, whatever, you put them all together, and you have defined some different articulations at different points to create some more authenticity and expressiveness, you want to go through and you want to do two things. You want to make sure that your velocity values for the MIDI are varied. The best way to do that is just actually play it, right? Don't just pencil it in, because if every note has the same velocity, it's going to sound robotic, and that is never going to work in orchestral music. It has to have as much humanity as possible. And we're not just talking about on the grid, off the grid here. We're talking about very subtle things like velocity. The last thing you want to do typically, and this is certainly what I do anytime working on production music, is use MIDI CC 11, which is expression, to kind of create swells and troughs in the dynamics of the performance, and a good library will respond to those dynamically as well. It's sort of like a volume, but it's volume within volume, if that makes sense to you. I don't want to get into it too much, because this isn't really a live stream about production music. My wrap up is, I think Orchestral Woodwinds is definitely convincing. I think that if you are working on EDM, or you're working on any kind of electronic music, bringing these instruments in, maybe pulling a MIDI clip from some other pack, right? Some melodic pack from a synth-based pack. Grab a live clip, drop it in. It's got the MIDI notes, right? But then run it through an oboe, run it through a flute or clarinet. It'll add interest and texture to your tracks, because these timbres from an oboe are different than people are used to hearing from synthesizers. Layering them together can get you a really cool sound, or even just mangling them up. Run a live clip through one of these oboes, resample that into an audio clip, and then mangle that up, chop it up, rearrange it, put it in sampler, chop it up, and play it back in a new rhythm. Maybe even try putting it into drum machines, doing reverses to take swells and turn them into risers or sweeps, that sort of thing. Getting different sound ideas in electronic music. A pack like this can be really helpful, even when you're not really trying to create a woodwind sound. It's just another timbre you can layer in with a kick, with a synth, with a pad, right? And just add more dimension to your music. So I will see you next week. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Thanks a lot for watching. If you have any questions or packs that you'd like me to cover, please let me know, and I will see you next time. All right. Have a great weekend.